Almost every animated movie is made for kids, but even in those films, there are things that only adults are able to notice. So, are you ready to discover these details that younger viewers completely missed? If there's one Disney production that fits perfectly into this theme, it's Zootopia. The animation knows how to entertain kids, but only the most obvious jokes were really made for them. There's a scene where Judy is messing around with her MP3 player, which shows a playlist with several bands and musicians. At first glance, it might seem like all of those artists and groups were completely made up just for the movie, and that's almost true. The names really are made up, but they're references to real-life singers and bands. Hyena Gomez is Selena Gomez, Guns N' Rodents is the band Guns N' Roses, Fur Fighters is the band Foo Fighters, and so on. And when we look at the songs listed on the MP3, we can see they follow the same pattern, like the song Let It Goat, a joke on Let It Go from Frozen. These jokes in Zootopia are on another level of cleverness, right? And this is only the first of 17 things that only adults noticed in animated movies, so grab some popcorn and get ready. It's time for another Cine Wave. One of the reasons adults have an easier time catching certain details while watching a movie is simply because they're more attentive. Another important reason is that many times these details are references to older movies that kids don't even know about. That's the case with a really cool Easter egg in The Bad Guys 2. In the scene, Officer Misty shows up with a mug that says, "I see guilty people." This phrase is a nod to the famous "I see dead people," which became iconic thanks to the movie The Sixth Sense, released in 1999. A big part of the fans of Mr. Wolf and his friends weren't even born yet when that classic came out.
I see dead people.
The Despicable Me franchise also loves this type of detail, which is proven in the second movie. In it, there's a scene where a minion is dancing while wearing a fruit hat. That might seem like just a silly gag, and it is, but it's not only that. He's actually imitating Carmen Miranda, a Brazilian singer who was hugely successful all over the world during the 1930s to 1950s. She had a very strong visual identity, being known for wearing a fruit hat. Of course, very few kids caught this reference since she's an artist from way back in the day. In Zootopia, something similar happens with the character Mr. Big. The tiny mob boss is already hilarious on his own, but it gets even better when you realize he's a parody of Don Corleone from The Godfather. He's got all the mannerisms and the way of speaking of that character, so anyone who's seen even one scene with Don Corleone immediately gets the reference. The thing is though, the Godfather trilogy started back in 1972 and ended in 1990, meaning younger fans of Zootopia never got the chance to watch any of those movies. Now it's time to talk about The Bad Guys 2, because there's another scene in this animation that hides a detail very few people actually noticed. When Mr. Shark disguises himself as a wedding planner, we see that his van, or better yet, the van of the guy he's pretending to be, has a phone number on it, 1-800-555-1099. That phone number, inside the movie's universe, belongs to the wedding planning company. But of course, that number also exists in real life. Or not. It's actually a number reserved exclusively for fictional works. That way, movies avoid showing a number that might actually belong to someone because fans could start calling that person non-stop. If you watched Moana 2, you'll definitely remember that green blowfish that attacked the navigator and her friends. As ugly as that thing is, it's also hilarious, especially when it lets out that super weird scream. But here's the catch, that scream isn't original to the movie. In reality, it comes from a very famous meme where a goat lets out that same yell. The production simply took the audio from that video and dropped it into the scene for comedy. And since that meme is already pretty old, very few fans recognized it. So what about you? Do you also love the Moana movies, and are you waiting anxiously for a sequel? If yes, then drop a comment down below with #Moana. Speaking of Moana, it's worth pointing out that the only thing Disney loves more than making references to other works is making references to other Disney works. Zootopia is once again here to set the example. When a car briefly shows up, you can notice a hook drawn on it. And not just any hook, but the exact one Maui uses to transform into animals. The funniest part is that Zootopia was released before Moana, but only by a few months. The Navigators movie was already in production at the time, so this Easter egg was 100% intentional. Another awesome Easter egg in this movie happens when the characters walk past a movie theater. One of the films showing there is called Star Trunk, which is clearly this world's version of Star Trek, a classic sci-fi franchise about space travel that marked the childhood of a lot of people, especially kids growing up between the 1960s and the 1980s. Zootopia really doesn't hold back when it comes to hiding Easter eggs that its main audience isn't even old enough to understand, but that's exactly one of the reasons why the movie is so amazing. Inside Out 2 follows that same vibe. If you don't believe it, just think back to the scene inside Anxiety's Panic Factory where bad thoughts are produced. That entire scene is practically identical to an old Apple commercial released in the 1980s, which itself was a direct reference to the book 1984, a story about a brutally authoritarian society. That ties in perfectly with what Anxiety was turning into during the movie. Another really cool thing about Inside Out 2 is that besides the new emotions, other characters who live inside Riley's head were introduced. One of them is Lance Switchblade, a video game character who used to be Riley's secret crush. What a lot of people don't notice is how much he looks like a character from a real game, Cloud from Final Fantasy. Both of them have that anime-inspired design, carry a massive sword, and strike the exact same pose with the sword resting on their shoulder, which, if you think about it, is actually pretty dangerous. We've already mentioned the time a minion paid tribute to Carmen Miranda, but believe it or not, that wasn't the only time the Little Yellow Guys honored a famous artist with a reference. In Minions 2, Gru's helpers become kung fu masters and wear yellow jumpsuits. Those two details are connected because the yellow jumpsuits are the exact same outfit Bruce Lee wore, one of the greatest martial artists who ever lived. He wore that outfit in the movie Game of Death, and it has been referenced in tons of work since then. A famous example? Uma Thurman's look in Kill Bill. Going back to the very start of the Despicable Me franchise, there's a detail in Gru's house we can spot from the very first movie. The villain has some very important paintings hanging up, like the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci and the Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. If we were talking about any other character, it'd be easy to assume those paintings are just replicas. But this is Gru we're talking about, the guy who used to be one of the biggest villains the world has ever seen. He definitely stole the originals and casually hung them in his house like it was nothing. Meanwhile, the only thing we're trying to steal from you is your boredom. And if you hit that subscribe button, you'll never feel bored again. Of course, in a video like this, there's no way Shrek could be left out, since the Ogres movies are known for slipping in details that only older viewers are likely to catch. Like that hilarious scene in the very first movie when Donkey suddenly starts flying. He only manages to do that after being hit with some magic dust, which came from a fairy trapped inside a little cage. And that cage, by the way, was being carried by a boy dressed in green. If you still haven't figured out where we're going with this, that boy was Peter Pan, and the fairy in his cage was his friend Tinkerbell. The fact that she was locked up like that is a pretty bad sign though, because it means Peter Pan actually imprisoned Tinkerbell just to hand her over to Lord Farquaad. And if you still don't get why that's such a bad thing, another Shrek Easter egg explains it perfectly. Lord Farquaad owns a rug made of bear fur, but this particular bear has a pink bow. That's because, in reality, the rug was made from the hide of Mama Bear. You know, from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. She had actually shown up earlier in the movie, alive and locked in a cage, and let's just say her fate was anything but nice. Pretty dark, right? What's worse is that it's left between the lines with no explicit scene of the character being killed. That's why so many people don't even notice it. Alright, let's switch to something a little sillier so we don't end this section on a depressing note. Luckily, Moana can help us out here. In the first movie about Disney's most fearless voyager, she and Maui come face to face with Tamatoa, a giant crab who's covered in all sorts of treasures on his shell. But Maui's magic fishhook wasn't the only magical artifact Tamatoa was showing off. If you look closely, among all that gold, you can spot none other than the magic lamp from Aladdin. To wrap things up, how about we talk about Minions: The Rise of Gru again? That movie is packed with details aimed way more at adults than kids, especially since the story takes place in the 1970s, back when a lot of today's older folks were still just kids. And it was also the decade when a bunch of classics hit theaters. One great example, Jaws, which actually appears on a movie poster during Minions 2, and let's be real, that film is anything but kid-friendly. Speaking of which, the Minions themselves only exist because of a film from the 70s, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. If you've seen it, or even just heard of it, you already know why, since it features a group of little guys who do everything Willy Wonka asks. The Minions? Nope, the Oompa Loompas. The creators of Gru's Yellow Henchmen openly admitted the inspiration, which means we can safely call the Minions walking references. Want to keep having this much fun? Just click on one of the 2 videos we left up on your screen. Thanks, and see you next time!